This freaking pandemic has left more than 36 million Americans unemployed and is taking a devastating toll on the economy, which is why everyone is so desperate to get back to business. Joining us now to tell us what's it really going to take to make that happen. Please welcome ABC Chief Business, Economics, and Technology Correspondent, the fabulous and amazing Rebecca Jarvis. So, welcome.
Thanks, Whoopi.
So the White House is pressing states to reopen without really testing or, just getting us back out and getting it. I don't think any American doesn't want to get back to work. But are we doing this the right way? Is there a better way to be doing this?
Well, Whoopi, I talked to economists of a lot of different political stripes, and across the board, they're pounding the table saying this is not a binary decision. This isn't a decision to save your life or save your job. And part of that comes down to getting back to work, but doing that very safely. And when I talk to businesses, CEOs, executives like IBM's Ginny Rometty, who has grown up with that company and run the company for a number of years, what they're looking for is more continuity, such that if she says to her employees, we're going to tell you to wear masks, we're going to take your temperature, we're going to do all of these things as you come back to the office, she knows that those employees, if they go and meet with employees at another company, they too are going to be safe. But back to this original idea, we very likely will not have a vaccine for this year and certainly not until next year. And as a result of that, if we are in a wait and see approach until we're in a completely perfectly finite, your health is 100% safe environment from COVID-19, there's the ripple effect of all of the economic consequences on people's health. The fact that people aren't going to doctors for routine checkups, that cancer screenings are down, that vaccinations for children are down. These all have long-term health consequences. And in the jobs market, what we've heard from Fed Chair Powell, for example, is that the longer unemployment lasts at these elevated rates, the more long-term unemployment will stay like this, and the harder it is to bring back those jobs in the future. And of course, that also has economic and personal consequences, suicide rates, issues with people being able to put food on their table. We have now already seen that play out, especially when it comes to food with the nation's food banks right now.
Rebecca, I have said on the show there are a lot of ways to die from COVID in this crisis. We're seeing depression levels we haven't seen before. Calls to suicide hotlines are spiking. Domestic violence is on the rise. Alcoholism and opioid use is up. How big of a role should these things play in opening back up the economy?
Well, it's certainly a factor to consider. Salesforce, which is a company that employs mostly people who can work from home, did a study early on in this crisis and surveyed all of their employees and found that more than 30% of their employees were already facing mental health issues. And for anybody out there who is especially in that category facing an issue, there are resources for you. I would recommend you reach out to your employer, that you reach out through your healthcare providers and seek help immediately. But in this bigger sense, Megan, where there are these outcomes, these negative outcomes that aren't just a matter of dollars, they are a matter of lives, it's a consideration. The United Nations put together research that shows they expect 250 million people around the globe to be facing starvation at the end of this year. And there are these ripple effects to keeping things shut down, to our food supply, that we are only seeing just the very early stages of what that will mean in a longer term sense, which is why, again, back to this original idea, it is so important to have consistency in messaging. And as we return to work, many CEOs tell me they want to see mask wearing be ubiquitous and they want to see testing. And they're willing to own some of that process and enforce some of that, but they want to see it ubiquitous across the board.
So, you know, I was thinking they can open whatever they want, all of these businesses, but if people don't feel safe sitting in a restaurant or even going to the restroom, not to mention, you know, going to the mall and shopping, sitting close to people in restaurants and sports events, etc., what are they supposed to do? People are not going to go, even if they say they can go. How are the businesses going to handle that?
Well, it's a really interesting point, and what we've actually seen in the states where there are reopenings and it's possible to reopen, some of the businesses have already selected to remain closed. Now, you could say that's because of public health, because maybe their employees are concerned to come back. You could also argue that some of these businesses, for example, a restaurant, where if you're reopening with social distancing measures in place, you're not going to have the number of tables in your restaurant that you had before this crisis began. And even if every single one of the tables that you do have open is filled, you're not necessarily going to be able to make ends meet to keep that restaurant surviving. So that's a big question as things go forward. One thing I would say, Joy, to anybody out there who might feel forced into returning to a job where they don't feel safe, under the CARES Act, there are provisions that say you can stay if you have a pre-existing or underlying condition that means that you would have a negative reaction or a more negative reaction to COVID-19 potentially. You can make the argument that you're not returning to work. You can continue to collect unemployment, even if you don't have childcare. And I know that's an issue. I mean, in our house, that's an issue, and I know that's an issue across the country. If you do not have childcare, you too can claim to your employer that you're not in a position to return yet, and you can collect unemployment, and that's under the CARES Act.
Rebecca, Dr. Fauci warned that if we open too soon, we risk triggering an outbreak that we can't control, and that could devastate the economy even worse than it is now. What are the risks of opening and then closing again? How damaging would that be?
Well, this strikes at the heart of the U.S. economy, and that is confidence. We are a consumer-driven economy, which means 70% of our economic growth comes back to how we behave as consumers. Are we spending money? And if the virus were to respond as people return to work with great spikes, and if we were to see this resurgence, something along the lines of 1918, that could be a huge issue for the economy. I would say that at the same time, also an issue for the economy is confidence around job security. If people start returning to work and jobs aren't coming back, if it suddenly is realized that actually these businesses, many of them small businesses, the 30 million small businesses across the country, either are afraid to reopen or can't reopen because of the new reality that we all face, that too can have a very devastating effect on both the economy and the indefinite reopening until there's a vaccine can also have devastating consequences for people, the jobs in this country, their livelihoods, and very unfortunately, their lives.